Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Sleepwalk by Dan Chaon. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Dan Chaon has been publishing for about 20 years. He's written, I believe this is his fourth novel. This is the first of his that I've read. It came out a couple years ago to pretty wide publicity. I saw that it was featured on NPR Book of the Day. Goodreads, I know, did a giveaway, so it's a pretty of his books that I've seen. It's probably the most well known. He's been nominated for a few awards, mostly for his short story stuff. He has some short stories that was nominated for. I think he was won or almost won the O. Henry Award, which is a pretty prestigious short story award. He's been had his work in the Atlantic. Was nominated or won a Shirley Jackson Award, which is a horror award. So he's pretty versatile. Hasn't published a ton of stuff as far as novels. This is the first of his stuff that I've read. This came out a couple years ago and is about a character who is kind of on the edge of society, who is something like a bounty hunter or a mercenary, more like an assassin than a mercenary, and he lives on kind of the edges of society and does all these kind of dirty deeds done dirt cheap type of guy. And it's set in this kind of post-apocalyptic. I would say it's not really necessarily post-apocalyptic, but it's more of like an America in decline. It's kind of has this like 5 minutes into the future feel. The year of the book, the book setting is never really revealed, but you get a sense that it's America a couple years into the future. If like the current the current trends continue as far as AI and robotization and drones and things of that nature. So the book kicks off with this character who goes by Billy, has a bunch of pseudonyms, but I'll just refer to him in this as Billy. Billy is contacted by someone who's claiming to be his long lost daughter. And the book is really an exploration of what this means to him in his life and what it means given his past, and what he's willing to give up and sacrifice to make this relationship work. That's non spoilers. That's really what the book is about. The book, he is, like I said before, kind of a shadowy man, and so he travels from place to place. So a lot of the book is kind of a road trip feel where he's kind of driving from place to place to do these jobs or to meet people. So you see kind of Dan being able to show you different parts of the country. And to me, that was the best part of the novel. Was if anytime you're doing kind of a 5 minutes into the future thing, you have a lot of different toys you can play with, and kind of that happens in the background. It's never really in the foreground of the novel, but Dan, I think, is good at kind of throwing in interesting bits and bobs of this world. So you have a lot of like drones that are kind of surveilling people, or at one point there's an EMP blast that occurs. There's kind of certain monuments have been damaged, and what does that mean, and what does that clue you into the world? So I thought that those parts of the book were interesting. I thought those were the parts where they're strongest. I wish some of those kind of came into the foreground a little bit more, but that is the part of the book that I liked the most. I also liked the book has a definitive ending. I think I was reading and I was worried, this book going to end? Is going to kind of end on in something of an ambiguous ending, and it doesn't. It has a very clear ending, and I appreciated that as well. I didn't really get it. The things I didn't like or liked a little bit less. The plot to me was very Byzantine and confusing. I thought the plot was much more confusing than it really needed to be. I think it could have been much more simple. It kind of goes into like all these like there's a bunch of kind of shadowy organizations in the book, and this character is kind of involved with them in different ways and forms and factions. And so a lot of the time is spent in the book of kind of explaining these different organizations, and I thought that could have probably been pared down quite a bit, given the plot of the book is really not super complicated in terms of the characters who are involved and what is going on in the relationships with them. So I think it could have been done a little bit more. I think it could have been done a little bit cleaner. I think that part of this is because he's writing in kind of this futuristic setting, so he kind of adds in like cults and things like that to make it feel a little bit more futuristic than it maybe needed to be. There's some kind of truly bizarre scenes in the book where there you meet certain characters and there's things that kind of feel thrown in just to be weird for the sake of weird that I kind of had a hard time with. The character himself, the main character himself, Billy, is not particularly a likable character. You get kind of his past and understanding of why he is the way that he is, and I think that psychological groundwork was laid pretty well. You kind of see why he's maybe become the person that he's become, but even then, he's not like super likable, and I had a hard time really fully understanding some of his motivations for doing what he was doing, um, even though like the reason that he is the way that he is pretty clearly explained. The reason why he does things maybe a little bit less little bit less explained. Um, I think who I would recommend this book to, if you're someone who likes Thomas Pynchon. Oh, I should say one more thing. I had a hard time with the pacing as well. I think the book is a little bit shaggy. It could have been trimmed a little bit, especially in the beginning. Excuse me. There's, I think, a few bits and bobs that are thrown in at the beginning, especially. It probably could have been tightened up. There's some things, like I said, this is part of the plot being kind of shaggy. I think there's some extraneous people and circumstances that I think are maybe more interesting to the author than they were for me to read. And I think that kind of probably could have been trimmed. I think the book probably could have been 30, 40 pages shorter than it ended up being, and I don't think you would have lost very much. Um, I like the technology aspect of it. I like the 5 minutes into the future aspect of it. I think that the writing itself is okay. Um, the ideas that he has as far as the background and the kind of the characters, most of them, like I said, are kind of pretty unlikable. There are some things that felt like they were weird for the sake of being weird. The writers that it reminded me the most of, to recommend the book to people, if you're a fan of Thomas Pynchon, if you're a fan of Jonathan Lethem's, especially Gun with Occasional Music, if you are a fan of Kurt Vonnegut, these to me, if I was going to put all three of those writers into a blender and blend them together and get kind of the darkest aspects of them, this is what it would remind me of. I didn't think the book was particularly funny, and I think Pynchon is funny, and I think there are things that I think a little bit of humor would have gone a little bit longer of way in this book. It's something of a dreary and grimdark book, and I found that was difficult. I think the writer wants you to kind of feel this hopeful sense of there's this thing, and we're kind of moving towards like a hopeful future for these characters, and I didn't really truly feel that. I can't really go into why that is without going into spoilers, so I don't want to do that. But I think the book could have had a little bit less of a pessimist streak throughout the book, and I think it would have served the book a little bit better. I think there also could have probably been more moments for humor. There's a lot of drug use in the book and a lot of casual drug use in the book. And it also kind of gave this like prevailing feel of like, I don't really understand these characters' motivations of why they do what they do. Maybe there's a sense of them trying to dull the pain of the things that they've done, but you don't really get the sense that this character is very introspective in terms of feeling guilt, except when he needs to be. Sometimes he's guilty, sometimes he's not guilty, and the reasons for that from a psychological standpoint didn't make a ton of sense to me. So that was, I think, some of the main issues I had with the book. I thought the hook of the book is interesting enough that when you get going, if you are into this mood, if you are someone who likes those authors, then this book will probably pull you through and you'll finish to the end. If you're someone who really does not like any of those authors, and don't really like kind of like a darker book, then you're going to bounce off this pretty hard. I wish there had been more levity in the book and more humor and less like, isn't that weird? Because there are a few isn't this weird moments, and I wish he had maybe brought some more from the background into the foreground as far as what does this mean to have this America that's kind of this in a terminal decline, and you have separatist movements, and you have cults, and you have all these things that are in the background that I thought were more interesting than what was happening in the foreground. And then overall, I think that the book could have probably been a little simplified and not as the plot machinations and convoluted and all that stuff. So if you're someone who likes kind of darker books, if you're someone who kind of likes a road trip type book, if you're someone who doesn't really mind, if you're someone who doesn't really mind some shagginess, then you may enjoy this. I thought that the execution could have been better, but I thought that the bits and bobs of it to me were interesting. So that is Sleepwalk by Dan Chaon. Next, I'm going to be reading David Brooks' The Second Mountain, something completely different. And if you've enjoyed this video, please like the video, subscribe if you haven't had a chance already. I'll leave my Twitter link below. If you have read this book and had different reactions to it, please let me know. Until next time, bye.